The silence inside the mahogany-paneled boardroom of the Palm Beach Country Club was not the kind of silence you find in a library. It was a heavy, expensive, suffocating silence. It was the silence of absolute power, arriving at a final, irrevocable decision. Through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, the 18th hole of the golf course looked pristine. The lawns were a vibrant, flawless green. The white canvas umbrellas over the patio tables rustled softly in the ocean breeze. It was a picture of perfect old-money tranquility. Inside the boardroom, however, my ex-husband was having a total public meltdown. Matthew was standing at the end of the long conference table. He was wearing a pristine designer suit, a luxury watch that caught the afternoon light, and an expression of pure, unadulterated shock. The glamorous, untouchable socialite mask he wore so carefully had completely slipped, revealing the terrified, status-obsessed man underneath. At the head of the table sat Charles Pembroke, the club president. Charles was a man who had inherited a fortune built in the 19th century. He was formal, intimidating, and possessed a voice that commanded absolute obedience without ever raising above a murmur. "Mr. Cole," Charles said, his eyes fixed on Matthew, entirely unmoved by his panic. "By unanimous vote of the Membership and Conduct Committee, your membership privileges are terminated, effective immediately. You are no longer permitted on club property. Security will escort you to the lobby to collect your personal effects." Matthew's hands gripped the edge of the polished table. His knuckles were white. "You can't do this," Matthew yelled, his voice cracking, echoing sharply against the wood paneling. "You have absolutely no right to do this. My divorce settlement gave me this membership. Andrea gave it to me." A federal judge signed the decree. Sitting to the right of Charles was Helen Forsyth, the chair of the Ethics and Membership Committee. Helen was sharp, precise, and had absolutely zero tolerance for drama. Helen picked up a thick, red manila folder and placed it gently in the center of the table. "A divorce decree can divide marital property, Mr. Cole," Helen replied coldly. "It cannot, however, authorize egregious violations of this private institution's code of conduct." Charles opened the red folder. Inside was the architecture of Matthew's own destruction. There were screenshots of payments from a tabloid bank account. There were high-definition security camera stills of Matthew, holding his phone under a table, recording the private conversations of other members. There were photocopies of leaked gossip articles that perfectly matched the dates and times of private club events. And underneath it all, there were 5 separate signed incident reports from the club's hospitality staff. Matthew stared at the evidence. The color drained completely from his face. He slowly turned his head and looked down the table at me. "You," Matthew hissed, his eyes filled with venom and humiliation. "You did this to me. You couldn't handle that I took your precious club in the divorce, so you set me up." I was sitting quietly in one of the leather armchairs, my hands folded perfectly in my lap. I didn't smile, I didn't gloat, I didn't raise my voice. "No, Matthew," I said calmly. "You demanded the key to this world. You fought tooth and nail for it. I just let you show everyone what you planned to do with it once you got inside. I am 45 years old. I am a senior partner at a commercial real estate investment firm, and for the last 10 years, I have served on the board of directors for one of the most exclusive, fiercely private country clubs on the Eastern Seaboard. To understand why Matthew was currently yelling in a boardroom, you have to understand what a private club actually is. For people outside this world, a country club is just a golf course with an expensive restaurant. But for the people inside, it is an entirely separate society. It is a fortress. Our club does not advertise. You cannot simply write a check to join. Membership requires a multi-year sponsorship process, extensive background checks, and unanimous approval by the board. The initiation fee is $250,000, but the money is the least important part of the application. The club is a sanctuary for billionaires, politicians, industry titans, and their families. They come here because it is the one place on earth where they can sit by a pool, have a few drinks, and speak freely without fear of being photographed, quoted, or harassed. The staff signs ironclad non-disclosure agreements. Cell phones are strictly forbidden in the dining rooms. Discretion isn't just a rule, it is the fundamental currency of our existence, and Matthew never understood that. I met Matthew when he was 30 years old. He was working in high-end public relations. He was charismatic, intelligent, and possessed a magnetic energy that completely captivated me. When we married, I genuinely believed we were building a partnership based on mutual respect and shared goals. I was wrong. It took me 3 years of marriage to realize that Matthew didn't love me. He loved my access. He viewed my wealth not as a tool for security, but as a weapon for social dominance. And the ultimate weapon in his arsenal was my country club membership. From the moment I handed him the secondary spouse card, his entire personality shifted. He didn't care about the history of the club. He didn't play golf. He had absolutely no interest in the quiet, unglamorous charity committees that actually helped the local community. Matthew only cared about the dining room. He treated the club like a hunting ground. He would spend hours meticulously grooming himself and selecting the perfect designer outfit, just to go sit on the terrace and accidentally bump into hedge fund managers. He name-dropped billionaires in casual conversation with our friends outside the club, using his proximity to wealth to inflate his own importance. He would constantly test the club's strict no photography rules, posting heavily cropped photos on his social media, just enough to let his followers know he was inside the fortress, but not quite enough to trigger a formal reprimand from the staff. I spent the latter half of our marriage constantly making excuses for him. I would apologize to the dining room manager when Matthew was rude about a table assignment. I would gently pull him away when he tried to insert himself into a private conversation between two CEOs at the bar. "Matthew, please," I whispered to him one evening after he had aggressively cornered a tech billionaire to pitch his PR services. "This is a social club. People come here to escape business, not to be solicited." "Oh, relax, Andrea," Matthew scoffed, sipping his scotch, entirely unbothered. "You are so old-fashioned. Networking is how the world works. If they didn't want to be approached, they shouldn't be sitting in a public room. I'm just playing the game." He truly believed that, because he's had a membership card, he was instantly equal to everyone in the room. He thought the rules were just polite suggestions for people who weren't bold enough to ignore them. The marriage finally collapsed in our 7th year. It wasn't a sudden explosion. It was the slow, exhausting realization that I was married to a man who viewed me merely as a stepping stone. When I discovered he was quietly siphoning money from our joint accounts to fund a lifestyle brand venture he was starting with a gossip columnist named Sloan Mercer, I filed for divorce. The divorce was vicious. Matthew didn't want a clean break. He wanted a bloodletting. He hired an aggressive theatrical attorney who specialized in high-conflict divorces. During the mediation process, I offered him an incredibly generous settlement. I offered him the primary house in the suburbs. I offered him the luxury SUV. I offered him a multi-million-dollar cash buyout that would have secured his financial independence for the rest of his life. He looked at the spreadsheet, pushed it back across the table, and shook his head. "I want the club," Matthew said, his eyes cold and absolute. I stared at him. "Matthew, the club membership is in my name. I am the primary sponsor. I've been a member since before we met. I don't care," he replied smoothly, leaning back in his leather chair. "My entire social network is tied to that club. The charity gala I am co-chairing next year is hosted in that ballroom. If I lose my access, I lose my standing in the community. I want the membership transferred to my name as an independent primary member. Or I take this to a public trial and I drag this out for 3 years. My attorney, a seasoned veteran of high net worth divorces, immediately intervened. "Mr. Cole, that is procedurally impossible," my attorney explained patiently. "Private club memberships are not standard marital assets like a couch or a bank account. They are subject to the governing bylaws of the institution. Ms. Cole cannot simply sign a piece of paper and hand the membership over to you. You would have to undergo an entirely new sponsorship and approval process with the board." Matthew's attorney, a man who looked like he enjoyed smelling blood in the water, smiled sharply. "Then Ms. Cole will formally sponsor his application as part of the settlement," his attorney countered. "And as a sitting board member, I'm sure she has the influence to ensure the application is expedited and approved. If she doesn't agree to this, we will demand a full forensic accounting of her firm's assets, which will require us to subpoena several of her business partners who are also club members. I'm sure they would hate the inconvenience." It was blatant, ugly extortion. He was threatening to drag my innocent business partners into a messy public spectacle simply to force my hand. I looked at Matthew. He was smiling. It was the smile of someone who believed he had just outsmarted the entire system. He didn't want the club because he loved it. He wanted it because taking it from me was the ultimate symbol of his victory. He wanted to walk into the dining room, look the billionaires in the eye, and know that he had beaten a board member at her own game. I was exhausted. I was tired of fighting, tired of the drama, and deeply tired of his presence in my life. "Fine," I said softly. My attorney looked at me, alarmed. "Andrea, are you sure? The board will not like a mandated sponsorship." I said fine, I repeated, looking directly at Matthew. "I will sign the sponsorship papers. I will present his application to the board as part of the finalized divorce decree. I will give him the membership." Matthew's smile widened into a triumphant grin. He practically vibrated with satisfaction. As the lawyers began drafting the addendum, I asked for the room to be cleared. I needed a moment alone with him. Once the door clicked shut, the heavy silence of the mediation room settled between us. "You think you won something today," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "I did win," Matthew replied, crossing his legs and smoothing his expensive suit. "I got the house, the money, and the access. You tried to lock me out of my own life, Andrea, and you failed. Private club membership is not a watch, Matthew," I warned him, genuinely trying to give him one final piece of advice before he walked off the cliff. "It is not a car you can drive however you want. It comes with rules. It comes with bylaws. It comes with an expectation of absolute discretion. You are entering that world without me there to run interference for you. If you break the code of conduct, the board will not care who your ex-wife is. They will remove you." Matthew laughed. It was a sharp, grating sound. "Oh, please," he scoffed, rolling his eyes. "Rules are for people who don't know the right people. Evelyn Rhodes loves me. The club president's wife invited me to her luncheons last week. They want me there. You're just bitter because you know I'm going to navigate that room better than you ever did." "I am a board member, Matthew," I reminded him quietly. "My job is to protect the institution. Your job is to sign the papers and get out of my way." He snapped, standing up. "I'm keeping the membership, and there is absolutely nothing you can do about it." He walked out of the room, his expensive leather shoes clicking aggressively on the hardwood floor. 2 months later, the divorce was finalized. True to my word, I submitted his independent membership application to the board. I explained the terms of the settlement, and because the board wished to avoid any legal subpoenas regarding my firm, they quietly, reluctantly approved the transfer. Matthew Cole was officially an independent primary member of the Palm Beach Country Club. The first time I saw him walk through the massive mahogany front doors after the divorce, he looked like a king, surveying a conquered kingdom. He was holding his head high and flashing his newly minted primary membership card to the front desk concierge with a level of arrogance that was almost painful to watch. He walked directly into the main dining room, scanning the tables for the wealthiest, most influential members he could find. He thought the hard part was over. He thought the divorce decree was an impenetrable shield that guaranteed him permanent access to the elite. He didn't realize that in a world built on trust and discretion, arrogance isn't a shield, it's a target. And he was about to make himself the biggest liability the club had ever seen. For the first few weeks after the divorce, Matthew treated the Palm Beach Country Club like his own personal red carpet. He was there every single day. He would arrive at noon, always overdressed, wearing bespoke linen suits, designer sunglasses, and carrying himself with unearned importance. He didn't come to play tennis. He didn't come to swim. He came strictly for the main dining room and the members' terrace. He was performing wealth. He wanted everyone to see him, but more importantly, he wanted to see everyone. The club's dining room operates on an unspoken social hierarchy. The tables near the windows, overlooking the 18th green, are traditionally occupied by the oldest, most established families, the billionaires, the senators, the founders of massive private equity firms. Matthew always requested a table as close to them as physically possible. I would occasionally see him when I stopped by the club for a quick lunch between meetings. He would sit alone, sipping an expensive scotch, his eyes constantly darting around the room. He wasn't just observing, he was hunting. One afternoon, I was seated on the far side of the terrace with a business associate. I watched Matthew sitting 2 tables away from Arthur Vance, a reclusive tech billionaire who rarely made public appearances. Arthur was having an intense, clearly private argument with his adult son about the future of his company's board of directors. Matthew wasn't looking at them. He was staring straight ahead, sipping his drink. But his right hand, holding his smartphone, was resting on his lap just under the edge of the table. The camera lens was angled perfectly toward Arthur's table. He was recording them. Later that evening, while sitting in my home office, I saw a notification pop up on my social media feed. Matthew had posted a heavily filtered photo of his scotch glass on the club terrace. The billionaires were slightly blurred in the background, but their silhouettes were undeniable. The caption read, "Inside the real rooms where power talks. Eavesdropping on a tech empire today. Palm Beach Life Elite, it was a blatant, arrogant violation of the club's fundamental ethos. The club's bylaws explicitly stated, no photography, videography, or audio recording is permitted in the dining rooms, lounges, or terrace areas. The privacy of our members is paramount." But Matthew didn't care. He was completely intoxicated by the proximity to power. He genuinely believed that, because he had forced me to sponsor his membership, he was untouchable. I wasn't the only one who noticed. 3 days later, I received a phone call from Luis Ramirez. Luis was the senior dining room manager. He had worked at the club for 20 years. He was incredibly professional, deeply respected by the board, and possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of every member's preferences and boundaries. "Miss Cole, do you have a moment?" Luis asked. His voice was unusually tight. "Of course, Luis. What's going on?" I replied, leaning back in my office chair. "It's regarding your ex-husband, ma'am." "Mr. Cole," Luis said carefully, clearly uncomfortable bringing it up. "There was an incident at lunch today." "Go ahead," I said, my voice perfectly calm. Mr. Cole was seated near the private alcove. Senator Higgins was dining with 2 local real estate developers. Mr. Cole was holding his phone up, clearly attempting to record a video of their table. Luis explained. As per club policy, I approached his table very discreetly and politely reminded him that photography is strictly prohibited in the dining room. "And how did he react?" I asked. Luis hesitated. "He was extremely hostile, ma'am. He refused to put the phone away. He told me I was just a waiter and that I had no right to police his behavior. When I gently reiterated the policy, he threatened me. He asked me if I knew whose membership he held, and he said he could have me fired by the end of the day if I didn't back off." I closed my eyes, The sheer audacity of his entitlement was staggering. He was threatening a 20-year veteran of the club because he had politely asked him to follow the rules he had agreed to when he signed the membership paperwork. Most ex-wives would have reacted emotionally. They would have called their ex-husband, screamed at him, and demanded he stop embarrassing them. I didn't do that. I was a board member. I had to operate above the emotion of the divorce. Luis, I am very sorry you were spoken to that way. That behavior is completely unacceptable, I said smoothly. But I need you to do exactly what you would do if he were any other member. Do not give him special treatment because of me. I want you to write up a formal, time-stamped incident report regarding the threat and the recording attempt. Submit it to the hospitality director's office by 5 o'clock. Are you sure, Miss Cole? Luis asked, surprised. I don't want to cause trouble for you. You aren't causing trouble, Luis. You are doing your job. Document everything, I instructed him. The first piece of evidence was officially on the record. But Matthew didn't stop. He escalated. A week later, I was sitting in the boardroom for our monthly executive committee meeting. Charles Pembroke, the club president, walked in looking unusually grim. He placed a printed copy of a digital tabloid article in the center of the table. The article was published by The Daily Whisper, a high-end society gossip blog run by a woman named Sloane Mercer. Sloane was notorious in Palm Beach. She made her living trafficking in the private scandals of the ultra-wealthy. The headline read, "Trouble in Paradise. Palm Beach retail hair facing billion-dollar divorce over hidden assets." I read the article. It detailed an incredibly specific, highly confidential argument between a prominent club member and his wife regarding offshore accounts. The quotes in the article were nearly verbatim. "This conversation happened 2 days ago," Charles said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register. They were having a quiet, incredibly tense discussion in the corner of the library lounge. There were only 4 other people in the room at the time. One of them sold this story to the press. The board was furious. For a private club, a leak to a gossip tabloid is the equivalent of a catastrophic security breach. If the members couldn't trust the privacy of the lounge, they would leave. And if they left, the club would die. "We need to review the security footage of the library lounge immediately," Helen Forsyth, the ethics chair, demanded. "We need to see who was sitting within earshot." I looked at the printed article. I knew Sloane Mercer. I knew that Matthew and Sloane had been friends for years. They had tried to launch a lifestyle brand together during our marriage. Matthew was obsessed with Sloane's digital influence, and Sloane was obsessed with Matthew's new access to the billionaire's fortress. I didn't say Matthew's name to the board. I couldn't accuse him without hard proof. Doing so would look like a bitter ex-wife trying to settle a personal score. "Pull the tapes," I agreed calmly. "Let's see who was in the room." That evening, I received a text message from Matthew. It was a picture of him sitting by the club pool, holding a cocktail. "Matthew, say what you want about the divorce, Andrea, but I'm finally getting some real value out of this membership. The networking here is incredible. I'm making moves," he was bragging. He was high on the thrill of the espionage, thrilled that he had successfully sold a piece of elite gossip to Sloane Mercer without getting caught. He thought he was a power player. I sat at my desk and looked at the text message. As his sponsor, the person who had legally vouched for his character to the board. I had a fiduciary duty to the club to warn him if I suspected he was violating the bylaws. I replied to his text, carefully phrasing my words to ensure they read as a formal, professional warning rather than a personal argument. "Andrea, Matthew, I strongly advise you to review the club's code of conduct. The board is currently investigating a severe privacy breach regarding unauthorized media solicitation and photography in the lounges. As your sponsor, I am officially warning you that the no recording policy is absolute. Do not risk your membership." I watched the read receipt appear on my screen. A minute later, his reply came through. "Matthew, Oh, please, stop trying to control me, Andrea. You're just jealous that people here actually like me. I haven't taken a single picture of anyone's face. And if the old money dinosaurs can't handle a little social media, that's their problem. You can't touch my membership. The judge gave it to me. Mind your own business. I stared at the text message. I almost smiled. In his arrogant desperation to prove he was untouchable, he had just provided me with written documentation. He had explicitly admitted to using social media in restricted areas. He had admitted to taking pictures, even if they weren't of faces. And he had openly refused a formal warning from his sponsor to comply with the code of conduct. I took a screenshot of the conversation, printed it out, and placed it in a secure file on my desk. The next morning, the situation escalated from a minor nuisance to a full-blown crisis. Evelyn Rhodes was the matriarch of the club. She was a 70-year-old billionaire widow, a major philanthropic donor, and easily the most respected woman in Palm Beach society. She was fiercely protective of her family's privacy, especially regarding her young grandson, who had recently been diagnosed with a severe chronic illness. The family was keeping the medical situation completely confidential to protect the child from media scrutiny. Evelyn hosted a very small, private charity luncheon in the club's sunroom. There were only 8 people at the table. Matthew, desperately trying to climb the social ladder, had somehow managed to maneuver himself into an invitation by offering to coordinate the event's PR for free, according to the later reports. The luncheon was going beautifully. Toward the end of the meal, Evelyn, feeling comfortable, surrounded by people she considered friends, briefly broke down in tears. She spoke softly about the terrifying reality of her grandson's diagnosis, the grueling hospital visits, and the emotional toll it was taking on her daughter. It was a moment of profound, vulnerable humanity. It was exactly the kind of moment the walls of the country club were designed to protect. Matthew didn't see a grieving grandmother. Matthew saw a massive payday. Sitting 2 chairs away from Evelyn, Matthew discreetly slipped his phone out of his jacket pocket. He rested it on his lap, obscured by the heavy linen tablecloth. He hit record. He didn't just record the audio of Evelyn crying. He recorded the specific medical details of the child's illness, the name of the private hospital they were using, and the dates of his upcoming surgeries. After the luncheon ended, Matthew went out to his car, sat in the driver's seat, and immediately forwarded the audio file to Sloane Mercer. He didn't just give Sloane a tip. He gave her the raw, unedited audio of a billionaire's private grief. I found out about it 2 days later. I was in my office when my phone rang. It was Charles Pembroke. He didn't bother with a greeting. "Andrea," Charles said, his voice shaking with a level of rage I had never heard from him before. "Have you seen the Daily Whisper this morning?" "No, Charles. I haven't." "What's wrong?" I asked, pulling up the website on my computer. There is an article. It details the exact medical condition of Evelyn Rhodes' grandson, Charles said, his words sharp and clipped. It quotes Evelyn directly. It describes her crying. It describes the private luncheon in our sunroom. Sloane Mercer didn't just get a rumor, Andrea. She got a transcript. I found the article. I read the headline, and a cold, heavy knot formed in the pit of my stomach. This wasn't just a divorce rumor. This was the exposure of a sick child. It was a violation of privacy so utterly abhorrent that it threatened to tear the entire social fabric of the club apart. Evelyn is devastated, Charles continued, his voice tight. She called me in tears. She is threatening to resign her membership and pull her family's entire philanthropic endowment from our foundation. If she leaves, half the board will follow her. This club will bleed out. Who was at the luncheon? I asked quietly, though I already knew the answer. 8 people. 7 of them have been members for over 20 years. They are Evelyn's closest confidants, Charles said. The 8th person was your ex-husband, Andrea. Matthew was at the table. Charles paused, letting the implication hang heavily in the air. I am calling an emergency meeting of the Ethics and Membership Committee for tomorrow morning, Charles announced. We are going to find out exactly who leaked that audio. And when we do, I am not just going to expel them. I am going to make sure they are a social pariah in this state for the rest of their natural lives. I understand, Charles, I said. Andrea, Charles added, his tone softening slightly, recognizing the delicate nature of my position. I know he is your ex-husband. I know the divorce was difficult. But as a board member, I need to know if you can approach this investigation objectively. I looked at the printed screenshot of Matthew's arrogant text message sitting on my desk. I thought about the sheer, predatory cruelty required to secretly record a crying grandmother and sell the audio to a tabloid. Matthew thought he was playing a game. He thought he was immune to the consequences because he had a piece of paper from a divorce judge. He was about to find out that a country club isn't a democracy. It is a dictatorship of etiquette, and the guillotine was finally being sharpened. You don't need to worry about my objectivity, Charles, I said calmly. I will be at the meeting tomorrow, and I will follow the bylaws to the absolute letter. The emergency meeting of the Ethics and Membership Committee was held at 8 o'clock the next morning, long before the club opened to the general membership. The atmosphere in the boardroom was incredibly tense. Charles Pembroke sat at the head of the table, his face a mask of barely contained fury. Next to him was Helen Forsyth, the ethics chair, flanked by 3 other senior board members. The printout of the tabloid article detailing Evelyn Rhodes' sick grandson lay in the center of the table like a live grenade. I took my usual seat near the window. Before Charles could formally open the meeting, I raised my hand. Charles, Helen, before we begin discussing the timeline of this breach, I need to make a formal declaration for the minutes, I stated, my voice clear and completely devoid of emotion. As you are aware, my former spouse, Matthew Cole, was present at the private luncheon in question. Because of my prior marital relationship with him and the high conflict nature of our recent divorce, I have a clear and undeniable conflict of interest in this matter. The board members looked at me, appreciating the procedural integrity. I am formally recusing myself from any disciplinary voting regarding Matthew Cole, I continued, looking directly at Helen. However, as a member of this board, I am willing to submit factual, time-stamped evidence regarding his prior behavior on club property to assist the committee in its investigation. Helen Forsyth nodded sharply. Your recusal is noted and appreciated, Andrea. We do not want this to look like a personal vendetta. We are dealing with a severe institutional threat. We need hard, undeniable facts. If we are going to expel a member, especially one who secured his membership via a federal divorce decree, the evidentiary file must be absolutely bulletproof. If he sues the club for wrongful termination, our lawyers need to be able to crush him in summary judgment. I can give you bulletproof, Helen, I replied quietly. Over the next 48 hours, the board did not act like an angry mob. We acted like a highly sophisticated intelligence agency, conducting an internal audit. Because I had officially recused myself from the final decision, I was permitted to act as the primary liaison for gathering the internal data. I didn't hack Matthew's phone. I didn't hire a private investigator to follow him. I simply collected the digital and physical footprint he had arrogantly left all over the club property. I started with the security footage. While the club prohibits recording in the dining rooms, we do maintain discreet, high-definition security cameras in the public hallways, the lobby, and the elevated corners of the sunroom for liability purposes. I sat in the security office with the head of IT and pulled the footage from the exact hour of Evelyn Rhodes' private luncheon. The camera angle didn't capture the audio of the conversation, but the visual was utterly damning. I paused the video and zoomed in. Evelyn Rhodes was clearly distressed, dabbing her eyes with a napkin. 2 chairs away, Matthew was sitting perfectly still. But his right hand, holding his smartphone, was positioned just below the edge of the tablecloth, angled directly toward Evelyn. 30 minutes later, the footage showed Matthew leaving the luncheon early. We tracked him on the exterior cameras walking to his car in the valet lot. He sat in the driver's seat for exactly 4 minutes, staring at his phone, typing rapidly before driving away. It was strong circumstantial evidence, but it wasn't a smoking gun. I needed to prove the pattern of behavior. I went to Luis Ramirez, the dining room manager. I sat with him in the empty dining room and asked him for the formal incident report I had requested a week prior. Luis handed me the signed document. It explicitly detailed Matthew attempting to record a sitting senator, and it quoted his direct threat against Luis's employment. But Luis wasn't finished. "Miss Cole, there is something else," Luis said, looking slightly nervous. After that incident, I instructed my waitstaff to keep a closer eye on Mr. Cole. One of our senior bartenders, David, reported a very uncomfortable interaction with him 3 days ago. "What happened?" I asked. Mr. Cole approached the bar when it was quiet. He asked David to point out which members currently in the lounge had the highest net worth, and specifically asked if he knew which ones were currently undergoing marital difficulties, Luis explained, his disgust evident. David politely refused to answer. Mr. Cole told him he was useless and left a 0 tip. "Have David write a signed statement," I instructed. "Add it to the file." Next, I provided the committee with the printed screenshots of my text messages with Matthew. I submitted the official, time-stamped warning I had given him regarding the no recording policy and his arrogant, defiant response explicitly refusing to comply. We had the pattern. We had the motive. But Helen Forsyth wanted absolute proof that Matthew was the direct source of the tabloid leak. Ironically, Matthew provided the smoking gun himself. Matthew was obsessed with his social media presence. He posted constantly, trying to cultivate the image of an elite, untouchable power broker. But people who are desperate for attention are inherently careless. On the evening the tabloid article about Evelyn Rhodes was published, Matthew had posted a quick video to his Instagram story, showing off a new luxury watch while sitting at a high-end cocktail bar downtown. What Matthew didn't realize was that, in the background of the video, his laptop was open on the bar. A younger, tech-savvy member of the club's administrative staff had seen the story before it expired. Recognizing the potential importance, the staffer had screen-recorded the video and paused it on the laptop screen. They ran the paused frame through a high-resolution image enhancer. The screen displayed an open email draft. The recipient was clearly visible: Sloan Mercer. The subject line of the email read, "Audio file, sunroom," and the visible text of the email read, "The audio is a bit muffled because it was under the table, but the crying is gold. Wire the payment to the usual account." It was the executioner's axe, wrapped in a neat digital bow. I printed the enhanced screenshot and placed it on top of the massive stack of incident reports, security stills, and text messages. I placed everything into a heavy red manila folder, stamped with the words, "Disciplinary review." The trap was fully set. Now, we just needed him to walk into it. While the board was quietly compiling the dossier, Matthew was living in a state of absolute, arrogant euphoria. The annual Palm Beach Charity Gala was scheduled for Saturday night. It was the most important social event of the season, hosted in the club's grand ballroom. It was the night where the social hierarchy of the city was cemented for the rest of the year. Because he was a primary member, Matthew had secured a ticket. He had spent $5,000 on a custom tuxedo. He had booked an expensive car service. He viewed the gala as his official coronation. The night he would finally prove to everyone that he had defeated me, that he had infiltrated the fortress, and that he belonged at the top of the food chain. On Thursday afternoon, as I received a phone call from Victoria, Matthew's mother, Victoria was a relentless social climber who had always encouraged Matthew's worst instincts. "Andrea," Victoria said, her voice dripping with condescension. "I'm calling to make sure there won't be any awkwardness at the gala on Saturday. Matthew is bringing a very wealthy date, and he doesn't want you hovering around his table looking pathetic." "I won't be hovering, Victoria," I replied smoothly. "Good. You need to accept that he won, Andrea." Victoria gloated. "He outsmarted you. He got the club, and he is thriving. You tried to keep him down, but he is going to own that room on Saturday night. He's finally where he belongs. We'll see," I said softly and hung up. Matthew thought he was untouchable. He believed that because I hadn't screamed at him, because the board hadn't immediately dragged him out of the dining room the day the article dropped, he had gotten away with it. He mistook our procedural silence for weakness. On Friday morning, 24 hours before the gala, Helen Forsyth sent an official courier to Matthew's condo. The courier delivered a single watermarked piece of heavy cardstock. It was a formal summons. "Mr. Cole, asterisk. Your presence is mandated at a brief conduct review meeting with the Ethics and Membership Committee today at 4 p.m. in the executive boardroom. Asterisk failure to attend will result in the immediate suspension of your gala ticket." When Matthew received the letter, he didn't panic. According to mutual acquaintances, he actually laughed. He assumed it was a minor slap on the wrist. He figured some old, stuffy board member was going to give him a polite warning about posting too many pictures on the terrace. He believed his divorce decree protected him from any real consequences, and he fully expected to charm his way through a 10-minute meeting before heading off to pick up his tuxedo. At 3:55 p.m. on Friday, I was sitting in my leather armchair in the mahogany-paneled boardroom. Charles Pembroke was at the head of the table. Helen Forsyth was seated to his right. The rest of the ethics committee sat in grim, absolute silence. At exactly 4 p.m., the heavy wooden doors swung open. Matthew walked into the room. He looked sharp. He was wearing a perfectly tailored designer suit, an expensive watch, and a confident, radiant smile. He walked with the posture of a man who fully believed he owned the building. He looked at Charles, he looked at Helen, and then he looked at me sitting in the corner. His smile widened into a smirk. He thought I had dragged him in here for a petty, jealous argument. "Good afternoon, everyone," Matthew said brightly, taking a seat at the far end of the long conference table. He elegantly adjusted his cuffs and placed his expensive phone on the polished wood. "I have a tailor appointment at 5, so let's keep this brief, shall we?" "What's this little meeting about?" Charles Pembroke didn't smile. He didn't offer him a glass of water. He simply reached out and placed his hand on the thick, red manila folder sitting in the center of the table. I watched Matthew's eyes drop to the folder. I watched him read the bold, black letters stamped across the cover. "Disciplinariu, ex Matthew Cole." Expulsion proceeding, his arrogant smile faltered. The room was deathly quiet. He had demanded the key to the kingdom. And now, the gates were locking behind him. Matthew stared at the red folder in the center of the table. The words, "expulsion proceedings," seemed to absorb all the oxygen in the room. For 3 seconds, he was perfectly still. Then, the arrogant, confident mask slammed back into place. He let out a sharp, dismissive laugh and looked directly at me. "Wow, Andrea, you really went all out for this little stunt, didn't you?" Matthew scoffed, waving a hand at the board members. "I knew you were bitter about the settlement, but dragging your colleagues into a fake tribunal just to intimidate me. It's pathetic. I have a court order for this membership. You can't expel me." Charles Pembroke didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue with him. He simply opened the red folder. "Mr. Cole, this committee has been convened under Section 4, Paragraph B of the club bylaws regarding conduct detrimental to the institution," Charles said, his voice cold, formal, and devastatingly calm. "We are here to formally review multiple, verified breaches of the club's code of conduct. Helen, proceed." Helen Forsyth adjusted her reading glasses and picked up the first document. "Mr. Cole, you are charged with 3 distinct violations," Helen stated cleanly. "First, unauthorized audio and visual recording of members within restricted club premises. Second, harassment and intimidation of club hospitality staff. Third, and most severely, the unauthorized solicitation and sale of private member information to external media entities. Matthew rolled his eyes. This is absurd. I haven't sold anything to anyone, and if some waiter told you I was taking selfies on the terrace, maybe you should remind your staff that we live in the 21st century. I didn't say a word. I sat in my chair, watching him dig his own grave deeper with every arrogant syllable. Helen Forsythe didn't argue. She simply pulled a large, high-definition photograph from the folder and slid it across the polished mahogany table until it stopped directly in front of Matthew. It was the zoomed-in security camera still from the sunroom. It clearly showed Matthew holding his phone under the tablecloth, angled precisely toward Evelyn Rhodes' tear-stained face. This footage was captured on Tuesday at 1:45 p.m., Helen said. Matthew looked at the photo. His confident smile faltered slightly, but he quickly recovered. So what? I was checking my text messages. It's not a crime to hold a phone. Helen slid a second piece of paper across the table. It was the formal, signed incident report from Luis Ramirez. This is a sworn statement from our senior dining room manager, confirming that you not only attempted to record a sitting senator, but that you explicitly threatened to use your ex-wife's influence to terminate the manager's employment when he asked you to comply with club policy. Helen read. He's lying, Matthew snapped, his voice rising in pitch. He's just a disgruntled waiter. Andrea probably paid him to write that to make me look bad. Charles Pembroke leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. He looked at Matthew as if he were examining a particularly unpleasant insect. Mr. Cole, Luis has been with this club for 20 years. We trust him implicitly, Charles said softly. But if you would like to discuss character, let us discuss Evelyn Rhodes. Charles pulled a piece of heavy, monogrammed stationery from the folder. Evelyn Rhodes submitted a formal impact statement to this board this morning, Charles read, because of the leaked article detailing her grandson's medical condition. An article containing information that was only spoken aloud in your presence. Her family has been subjected to relentless paparazzi harassment at the Children's Hospital. Her daughter is suffering severe emotional distress. Evelyn wrote that her trust in this institution has been completely shattered. Matthew's face paled, but he stubbornly crossed his arms. I feel terrible for Evelyn. I really do, but I didn't leak that story. Tabloids have sources everywhere. You can't prove it was me, just because I was in the room. It was the exact defense he had planned. Deny the connection to the tabloid, blame anonymous sources, hide behind the burden of proof. Helen Forsythe looked at me. I gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Helen reached into the back of the red folder and pulled out the final piece of paper. It was the enhanced screenshot of the laptop screen, captured from Matthew's own careless Instagram story. Helen slid it across the table. Matthew looked down at it. He saw the email draft. He saw Sloan Mercer's email address. He saw the subject line, audio file or sunroom, and he saw his own typed words. The audio is a bit muffled because it was under the table, but the crying is gold. Wire the payment, the silence in the boardroom was absolute. Matthew stared at the screenshot. His mouth opened, but no words came out. The arrogant, untouchable socialite mask didn't just slip this time. It shattered into a million pieces. The reality of the situation finally crashed down on him. This wasn't a warning. This wasn't a negotiation. It was an execution. You? Matthew stammered, his hands beginning to shake. He looked up at Charles, his eyes wide with panic. That's taken out of context. You invaded my privacy. You stole that from my social media. You posted it publicly, Mr. Cole. Charles corrected him, his tone completely devoid of sympathy. You recorded a grieving grandmother in our sanctuary, and you sold her tears to a gossip rag for a wire transfer. You treated the privacy of our members like inventory. Matthew turned to me, his eyes wild, desperate. "Andrea, say something," he pleaded, abandoning the tough act entirely. "Tell them. Tell them the judge gave me this membership. They can't do this. The gala is tomorrow night. I'm bringing guests." I looked at the man who had spent our entire marriage using me as a stepping stone, the man who had extorted me during our divorce just to gain access to a room he didn't respect. "I told you, Matthew," I said quietly. "Private club membership is not a watch. It comes with rules." Charles Pembroke closed the red folder. He didn't ask for his defense. He didn't ask for a final statement. He simply delivered the verdict. "Mr. Cole," Charles announced, his voice echoing in the silent room. "By unanimous vote of the Membership and Conduct Committee, your membership privileges are terminated, effective immediately. You are no longer permitted on club property." Matthew stood up. His chair scraped violently against the hardwood floor. "You can't do this," Matthew screamed, his voice cracking, his pristine designer suit suddenly looking absurd against his desperate panic. "I am Matthew Cole. You need me for the gala committee. You can't kick me out. I'll sue the club. I'll sue all of you." The heavy wooden doors of the boardroom opened. Two large, impeccably dressed security officers stepped into the room. They didn't grab him. They simply stood on either side of the door, waiting. "Security will escort you to the lobby to collect your personal effects," Charles said, looking down at his notes, dismissing him entirely. "Do not return to this property. If you do, you will be arrested for trespassing." The security officers took a step forward. Matthew looked around the room. He looked at Helen, who was already reviewing another file. He looked at Charles, who wasn't even looking at him. And finally, he looked at me. He expected me to save him. He expected me to protect him from the consequences of his own actions, just like I had done for the last 7 years. I didn't move. "You did this," he hissed, tears of pure humiliation finally spilling down his cheeks. "No, Matthew," I replied smoothly. "You demanded the key to this world. I just let you show everyone what you plan to do with it." The security officers politely, but firmly, guided him out of the boardroom. The public humiliation in the lobby was far worse than anything that happened in the boardroom. It was 4:30 on a Friday afternoon. The club lobby was bustling with prominent members arriving for pre-gala cocktail receptions. As the security officers escorted Matthew down the grand staircase, he was visibly unraveling. The elegant, untouchable persona was gone. He was clutching his expensive phone to his chest, his face red, demanding that the officers let him go to the locker room to retrieve his tennis racket. They quietly refused. Every single head in the lobby turned to watch. The hedge fund managers he had tried to network with stared at him in shock. The politicians he had tried to flatter watched him in disgust. The staff members he had belittled stood silently by the reception desk, watching his downfall. Luis Ramirez was standing near the dining room entrance. As Matthew was escorted past him toward the front doors, Luis simply gave him a polite, professional nod. The final devastating blow happened right in front of the main entrance. The club's event coordinator was standing near an easel, finalizing the massive, beautifully calligraphed seating chart for the charity gala the next night. As Matthew watched, trembling, Charles Pembroke's executive assistant walked over to the easel, took a black permanent marker, and drew a single thick line directly through the name Matthew Cole at table 4. The security officers opened the heavy mahogany doors, and Matthew was escorted out into the Florida heat. The doors closed behind him with a heavy final thud. The aftermath of Matthew's expulsion was absolute, complete social death. In the world of the ultra-wealthy, word travels faster than light. When the details of why he was expelled, specifically the recording and selling of Evelyn Rhodes' private grief, leaked into the quiet circles of Palm Beach society, Matthew became instantly radioactive. The elite aren't afraid of losing money. They are afraid of losing their privacy. By Monday morning, Matthew's social empire had completely collapsed. The wealthy friends who had eagerly attended his dinner parties stopped returning his calls. The charity boards he had fought so hard to join quietly removed his name from their letterheads. He had pending membership applications at 2 other elite secondary clubs in the area. Both applications were quietly withdrawn after his sponsors inexplicably pulled their endorsements. No one wanted to be associated with the man who sold out Evelyn Rhodes. Even Sloane Mercer, the tabloid columnist who had paid Matthew for the leak, completely ghosted him to avoid any potential legal liability from the club's high-powered attorneys. 3 weeks after the expulsion, I was sitting in my home office when my cell phone rang. It was Matthew. I let it ring 3 times before I answered. "Andrea," Matthew said. His voice was hollow. The arrogant edge was completely gone. He sounded exhausted. "Please, you have to fix this." "Fix what, Matthew?" I asked calmly. "Everyone has blocked my number. The country club, the yacht club, even the tennis club across town," he said, his voice cracking. "They blacklisted me. I can't even get a reservation at the good restaurants downtown anymore. My mother won't even speak to me because she's embarrassed to be seen with me. Please, go to Charles. Tell the board it was a misunderstanding. Tell them you forced me out because of the divorce. I'll give you back the alimony. Just give me my reputation back." I listened to him beg. I thought about the sheer, manipulative cruelty he had shown to everyone he considered beneath him. "I can't reverse a unanimous board decision, Matthew," I said. "And even if I could, I wouldn't." "I am your ex-husband," he cried. "And they were my friends," I replied. "You treated privacy like inventory. You thought rich people were content. You wanted my access, but you forgot that access comes with rules. The most expensive thing you lost wasn't the membership, Matthew. It was discretion." I hung up the phone. I didn't block his number, but he never called again. A year has passed since that afternoon in the boardroom. The club is quiet again. The members sit on the terrace, drink their wine, and speak freely, knowing that the walls of the fortress are secure. The staff is respected, and I am finally free from the exhausting burden of protecting a man who believed he was above consequence. I didn't take revenge by lying. I didn't hack his phone, or frame him, or raise my voice. I simply stepped aside and let the rules apply to someone who thought rules were beneath him. Matthew spent our entire marriage chasing rooms he didn't belong in. In the end, he demanded the key and used it to rob the house. And the house fought back. So tell me honestly, if your ex demanded the one social space you had protected for years, then used that access to secretly record people, sell their private lives, and humiliate the staff who tried to stop him, would you stay silent just because the divorce was over? Or would you hand the evidence to the people whose job it was to protect that room? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one.